Welcome back to the Createch stage at Virtual CogX. A special welcome to those of you who are new to the stage. The Createch stage is hosted by the UK Creative Industries Council and supported by Facebook, UKRI, Moore Kingston Smith and Digital Catapult. CogX is all about community. And if the creative industries is a community you want to belong to, just email us at createch@thecreativeindustries.co.uk and we'll make sure to keep you involved. The overall theme of CogX this year is how do we get the next 10 years right? And for us in the UK creative industries, that means how do we invent, master and manage the new world where creativity meets technology? And how do we manage the recovery from the pandemic in order to help creative businesses and cultural institutions survive and thrive? And to help us get ready for the upturn and plan for recovery, we have some highly influential guest speakers to help set the context. First up is the Minister for Export for the Department for International Trade. The Department for International Trade is an international economic department responsible for bringing together policy, promotion, and financial expertise to break down barriers to trade and investment and help businesses succeed, promoting British trade and investment across the world. The Department for International Trade helps businesses export and grow into global markets. It also helps overseas companies locate and grow in the UK. The Minister for Export will be joined by the Chair of the Creative Industries Trade and Investment Board. The Creative Industries Trade and Investment Board is an industry-led advisory board for UK government, involved in the UK government's plans and investment for the creative industries, and charged with recommending long-term strategic decisions for the government's trade and investment policy. Please welcome Graham Stuart MP, Minister for Export, Department for International Trade, and Annette King, CEO Publicis Groupe UK and Chair of the Creative Industries Trade and Investment Board.
Hello there, Graham. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Annette.
Nice
it's
to see you again.
Lovely to talk to you again. Yeah,
last saw you at our board meeting in March. Thanks again for coming to that. So it's good to catch up. We've only got about 15 minutes just under, and I've got quite a few questions for you. So should we just dive straight in?
Sure, go for it.
So the first one is, why do you think the creative sector is so important to this country's drive for export?
Well, the creative sector is one of the UK's economic success stories, and one of the frustrations, of course, with the negative impact of COVID is just what a strong place we were in before that hit. The latest gross value added figures published by another government department, DCMS, for 2018 showed that creative industries contributed almost £112 billion to the UK economy, and that the creative industries were growing 5 times more quickly than the UK economy overall. So as we move out of the lockdown, it's important that the UK maximises its competitive advantage and helps and supports industry get going again as quickly as possible. So we not only can make sure that we don't lose market share, we can seek, if anything, to gain it. Now, many businesses have been hard hit by the lockdown, but of course the UK retains an incredibly talented workforce. Creative industries tax reliefs in areas such as film and TV, video games, animation. And the government has provided £58 million of investment in research and development in immersive technologies, which I know are a particularly vibrant sector, funded by the Industrial Strategies Challenge Fund. And if I may, I just give some examples of research and development support for those watching and listening. There are a number of Innovate UK schemes, such as Audience of the Future, that are worth investigating. And of course, recently, DCMS, as I say, our sister department, launched the 5G Create competition, which is another significant step in encouraging people to work together to provide creative solutions. So I think it's an enormously important sector, strongly behind it, and delighted to be invited yet again. I enjoyed the breakfast last year, and I think this is my 3rd year in a row of attending Createch, and the fact that this is going ahead is an enormous credit to the flexibility and agility of UK firms. So well done for CogX for putting on what must be one of the largest virtual events in the world.
Yes, indeed. Well done from me too. So next question is, how do you see government and industry working together and where? And could you give us some examples of that?
Yeah, good question. I mean, we are already working closely together, as you know better than anyone, Annette, through the Creative Industries Trade and Investment Board. And that's looking to prioritise export markets and identify those areas where government spending might make the biggest difference in order to support exports. We work closely with industry to identify market access barriers. So wherever there are frictions, if you like, that get in the way, we want to identify that. And I have people in 110 countries around the world, as well as a full complement of staff throughout the United Kingdom who can work on not only identifying those barriers, but then engaging with partners to try and eradicate them. And we use various mechanisms to do so, including government-to-government fora. And of course, yesterday, we started our negotiations with the Japanese on a free trade agreement with the aim to build on the current EU-Japan agreement and do a much more ambitious deal, particularly, interestingly, in digital and data. Make sure that code can be protected, that data can be processed and handled and stored where it's most appropriate for businesses concerned. So we're hoping that that Japanese deal will be the most advanced data-informed trade deal in global history. So we're not modest in our ambitions. We also, as I say, raise these issues regularly with our international trading partners, and creative industries companies work as partners with the GREAT campaign, for which I'm personally responsible within the Department for International Trade. And GREAT comes primarily, although it's a cross-government program, the largest single government communications spend. DIT leads on it, but we work with partners across government to deliver it and enhance UK soft power and the global Britain agenda.
Great. The SME community are so important to our economy. What's the government doing and planning to do to support that community from here on?
Yeah, well, that's something I wrestle with all the time, because we obviously have finite resource, and typically we target it at where we can get the biggest bang for our buck. And therefore there's a tendency to give preference to larger businesses rather than smaller businesses. And yet when you look across the economy, the most dynamic and often the fastest growing are in the smaller area. So we're always struggling with how to get that balance right. One thing we're doing on the free trade agreement negotiation front is having small and medium enterprise chapters in our negotiations. So we have an SME chapter in our US negotiation, because we started that negotiation really just a few weeks ago. We had a 2-week round with 100 negotiators in engagement with their US counterparts, and making sure that SMEs are fully included. Likewise, our Japanese negotiation will have an SME chapter in it as well. And when we go forward to negotiations with Australia, New Zealand, and with a view to entering the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP, which has 11 nations in it, and in the Asia-Pacific area, one of the fastest growing areas of the world, again, we're working really hard to make sure that everything from customs regulations, ensuring that things are easy to follow and understand, and that the data rules allow small businesses more easily to do business. But other support that DIT already provides that's particularly relevant to SMEs includes specialist advice from our network of international trade advisors, ITAs, in England. And we have 275 plus of those, and we're recruiting more, particularly in the North, the Midlands, and the Southwest. And the devolved administrations deliver their own export services to SMEs as well, in conjunction with us. We have peer-to-peer learning, which has been a really great development through our UK export champions community. These are experienced exporters, because however useful it may or may not be for exporters to hear from the likes of me in government, actually meeting someone else who runs a business similar to your own and who has gone on the same exporting journey that you're going to have to set out on, we find that really works, and we're expanding that UK export champions community as we go forward. We have digital support, and as I work on a new export strategy, which will be coming out later in the summer or autumn. We are looking to ensure that we're more digitally informed. We've got to learn from things like Createch's success and CogX's success, make sure we embed an understanding of how digital means can allow us to provide a better service to small companies when face-to-face on a large scale probably isn't possible within our resources. So digital support, detailed market guides, and export opportunities are all to be found on great.gov.uk, and we keep working on improving that as a place where both foreign investors can find out information about the UK, but UK businesses can find out about foreign markets. We also have a package of financial support from UK Export Finance, which is our export control agency, and I'm pleased to say had a 100th year birthday last year, but has been voted again and again the best export credit agency in the world. And we're looking to get them to do more for the smaller and medium businesses. And there are new products coming through, often in partnership with banks, so that if you've got an export-oriented business, that you'll be able to get working capital for your business, and it's well worth inquiring more into that. And of course, many companies here will have taken advantage of trade show access program support, TAP support, or taken part in other DIT-delivered trade missions. And we have good examples where industry and government have worked together to help digital and creative technology companies go forward. So just in the last 12 months, DIT has taken companies to events such as Cannes, Lions, Slush, South by Southwest, Mobile World Congress, Euroshop, and the Consumer Electronics Show. So up to the end of 2020, and perhaps more permanently beyond that, DIT will provide support for companies to do business and meet new customers in digital settings. We are seeking to be as agile and responsive as the private sector is, even though we'll be doubtless just a tiny bit slower. But the TAP program has been repurposed precisely so that it can support virtual meetings and doesn't just stick with its previous rules.
Great. So coming from a creative sector perspective specifically, how can and how is the government assisting in the recovery plan that we need in this sector, obviously to varying degrees across the sector, but what is and what can the government do to help us with that?
Well, I think there's a lot we can. I mean, there's a lot we're already doing, and I'm struck. I spend most of my day in exhausting virtual meetings, but inspiring as well, talking to individual companies or round tables. And business has expressed again and again its gratitude for the speed and efficacy with which the government moved to support businesses given the unprecedented challenges of coronavirus. So we've of course had the coronavirus job retention scheme, the self-employed income support scheme, which has been so important. And all those meetings I was having with representative organisations, we were then passing that back onto the Treasury, and we watched the Treasury then adjust and amend and come forward with new ideas, such as that self-employed income support scheme, which is again you'll have seen recently been extended, and the bounce back loan scheme as well, which has had an astonishing take up. The government through DCMS has also worked closely with the film and TV sectors to reach agreements to get production started again in a safe way. And it's so important, given the size and success of those sectors, that we show that the UK is a place where production can start again, whether you're in TV, film, advertising, the lot. We've got such great talent, and we've been doing so well and growing our market share. We want to make sure that safely we're able to keep that going. Now, I also understand the Creative Industries Council has drafted a recovery paper, which it shared with government in draft form. And we've tried, as I've already touched on, to be responsive in directing funding to digital events where the physical versions were cancelled. And we've supported an online music sync conference, for instance, meetings for video games companies with investors, and meetings for children's media companies with Chinese buyers, and many other digital events are planned. And of course, today we are launching a tech recovery package with various elements from an exporting academy supported by some of the key advisors in this country. On the one hand, a new digital trade network in Southeast Asia with millions behind that. So we're look out for that, because we're really determined, and we recognise that the creative industries and tech more broadly has a tremendous amount to offer, and we're determined to keep it growing. We had the fastest growth in investment in our tech sector last year of any major economy in the world, in fact more than France and Germany combined. So we want to make sure that we don't lose momentum, we keep building on it. And we're, as I also touched on, we're working on new export and inward investment strategies and recovery plans, and we'll be consulting closely with industry to make sure that this sector can get back on the path to growth once again.
Great. So my last question, because we've only got a couple of minutes left, is how would you describe why the UK is a great place or the best place for international investment?
Well, it's first off, it's people. I used to be the investment minister, and what was the number one issue for any company in any sector? Talent. And what do we have in depth here in the creative industries in particular? Talent. So that's the biggest reason. And then you've got the fact that we've got a regulatory system, which is that was far from perfect, but I think pretty much looks better than most other people, with independent regulators giving you more certainty than you will find in many other places. You've got a legal system which people trust, and in fact, even when they're not doing business here, they choose to use English law as the way to resolve their issues. We've got all sorts of great government schemes, from the patent box and others, as well, of course, as the targeted tax breaks, which I'm proud to say this government has expanded over the years, and all of which has added up to creating, I think, the most successful inward investment environment of a major economy in the world. We get more foreign direct investment than any other country in the world, excepting only the US and China and Hong Kong. And if you look at film and TV investment alone was around 3 billion in 2019. And our history of innovation, a supportive business environment, talented workforce, a track record of working with businesses overseas, making them welcome and helping them grow, all of which adds up to making us the best place in the world to come and do business. And anyone who's from abroad who's not currently doing business in the UK, we would be delighted, and my department would be delighted to work with you and help you find the best way of investing and succeeding here.
And on that note, Graham, we're out of time, so thank you very much. And over to you, Janet.
Thank you, Graham and Annette. And how encouraging to hear you talk about all of those opportunities for export and inward investment and being open for business globally. And I'm particularly interested to hear about that new tech recovery package. We'll certainly look that out. So what you've talked about is great for our go-ahead Createch, digital and data businesses. But what about our cultural institutions and outlets, many of which have been in lockdown since March and have suffered as a consequence? What can government do to help them prepare for recovery? And more specifically, the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. Let's hear from the man charged by government to help draw up the plan. Neil Mendoza is Provost of Oriel College, Oxford, and newly the Commissioner for Culture Recovery and Renewal at DCMS. He has built a successful career in the creative and finance sectors and is chair of the Landmark Trust and the Illuminated River Foundation. In his new role, he has been appointed by the Secretary of State to challenge and advise government policy and decision-making in regards to the recovery of the culture sector from the COVID-19 pandemic, and work with the sector on innovative solutions for its reopening. This role builds on his tenure as a non-executive director at DCMS and leadership of the Mendoza Review of Museums in England in 2017. Neil will be in conversation with Ian Livingstone, former member of the Creative Industries Council, who knows a thing or two about what the industry needs. He's a passionate supporter of creative endeavour and invests in the sector as a partner in Hiro Capital LLP. Ian is also chairman of Sumo Group plc and sits on the board of Creative England. He has been described as one of the founding fathers of the UK games industry. He was the mastermind behind such iconic brands as Games Workshop, the Fighting Fantasy Gamebook series, and Lara Croft Tomb Raider. Please welcome Neil and Ian to the stage.
Thank you, Janet. Hello, Neil. How are you?
Hello there. Hi, Ian. How are you?
Good, thank you. Right, this is we've only got 15 minutes, so I think we should get right down to it. I mean, I'm delighted to be part of the creative industries. I mean, creativity gives us an edge as a nation. I mean, it's the envy of the world, and yet it's an intangible asset which cannot be weighed or measured. So, in your brief role in the department, can you give me an understanding of your sense of the government's importance surrounding culture and creativity?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I mean, defining culture is quite a tough one. I mean, the first thing I would say, to echo Janet, is that the future and state of culture at the moment, and our cultural organisations, the people that work in that sector, is an incredibly serious position. And I personally feel and see the value of culture every hour of every day. And there are better people than me in articulating what it means. I was thinking of articles recently by Sam Mendoza, the director, and the playwright James Graham in the paper. And I really refer people to read those to get an idea of what culture really means to us. But culture for government is a very specific thing. It sits within the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. And culture, unlike the creative industries, is designed in its own area, and it includes performing arts, arts more generally, museums and galleries, heritage sites and places. It can go more widely to include orchestras, dance, festivals, but really those are the areas that culture is covered by government. But if I can just take museums as an example, as Janet said, I did a review for the government a couple of years ago. There are 1,312 museums in England, in villages, towns and cities, up and down the country. They're large, they're medium-sized and they're small. And if you begin to think of the impact on communities and on place of those organisations, and then add in all the other aspects of culture, the other heritage sites and places and arts and performing arts organisations, you begin to get an understanding of what they mean to towns and places. And they work seamlessly and brilliantly together. So if you think about Manchester, you might have the Halle Orchestra, the Manchester Museum, the Whitworth Gallery, the Royal Exchange Theatre. Or in Liverpool, you have the World Museum, the Museum of Liverpool, the Walker Art Gallery, and the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic, and the Liverpool Cathedral. So you've got to see all this as one sort of interconnected ecosystem. And it is an incredibly successful sector. And it generates for the government, well, for the nation, about £32 billion of GVA, according to those 2018 statistics that Graham Stuart mentioned. And then, of course, that aspect of culture and that talent feeds into the creative industries and supplies talent to film and television, which also in the creative industries produces that giant 112 billion number that the minister mentioned before.
And 2 million jobs, of course. The UK government reacted pretty well to the economic crisis in terms of policies such as job retention scheme and business loans. But for cultural organisations that relied on bodies like Arts Council and Heritage Fund to provide emergency arts funding, inevitably, and I've had experience with this through the National Video Games Museum in Sheffield, there's some of the smaller organisations have fallen between the cracks and faced.
It's really difficult. One of I mean, many manifestations of government taking it seriously is that they've appointed me to come in and work with ministers to try and come up with a solution quickly. We know how serious the situation is. Unlike in other businesses, the entire income of cultural organisations has been removed, and it hits the most successful in a way the hardest, the ones that rely least on government subsidy. And I'm sorry to hear about your particular museum, and I know that that's because your museum hasn't quite got through the accreditation process. And we are going to have to look at the ones that fall through the cracks in the same way that we have to look at the great talented army of freelance people and incredibly skilled people who are also not necessarily able to claim on schemes like the self-employed income support scheme. What we've done is we've set up a task force in government which is looking at the whole of the recreation and leisure sectors, and into that we've got 8 working groups covering various sectors like entertainment, museums, and arts. And in those groups, we have dozens and dozens of representative organizations, large and small, which are feeding in detail of their particular situations so that we can look to provide the support that they need. And it's very hard for me to talk about it at the moment because it's something that we're trying to work very hard on with other government departments and to make sure that we can do something. And I'd like to be able to do something quickly if we can.
Thank you. Yeah, you mentioned Sam Mendes earlier, who called the COVID-19 pandemic the biggest challenge to Britain's cultural life since the outbreak of World War II, and stresses that the arts are a giant economic growth engine. He's calling for increased tax relief for theatres in particular. What is your task force's priorities in overcoming the challenges facing cultural business on the road to recovery?
Well, my personal priority is to make sure that we can rescue the organisations before we move on to the next stage. And we already have, as you know, the job retention scheme has been an incredibly important aspect of that, which is applied across the economy. And similarly, the self-employed income support scheme has also been important, and that has been extended for a period, although that will begin to phase out.
Okay.
But listen, well, what I wanted to say is I know exactly what it's like. As Janet mentioned before, I'm chairman of an organisation called the Landmark Trust. I'm coming to the end of a decade of chairing it. And that charity's model is to save and rescue and maintain historic places that would otherwise be lost. And our whole model relies on the fact that we can rent out places to people and bring in cash. And like theatres and like other performing arts spaces, we've lost 100% of our income. So we need to get back as quickly as we can.
The evidence shows that kind of digital businesses, particularly in the creative industries, have fared relatively well during the pandemic. So in this kind of post-COVID-19 world, the network economy will undoubtedly continue to accelerate. In view of this, do you see the need for cultural organizations and businesses to change both their methods of delivering content, their offering to the public, and also their business models to be able to monetize the global economy as opposed to their local economy?
I'm incredibly envious of the gaming world. Chatting to you beforehand, I could just see how the gaming world, particularly the areas you're involved in, have been almost unaffected by this. In fact, in many ways, stimulated by it. And that's just wonderful. And I'm really pleased for the success of that sector. I mean, I'll come to the digital element, but the whole essence of our cultural sector is what we try and do is we try and bring people together. We try and do the opposite of social distancing. We try and bring people physically together in spaces. And we know that if you watch a film together, or you go to the theatre together, or you watch sport in a pub together, it's a completely different experience than doing it alone, even if it's digitally. And so I don't think we'll ever get away from that as the main force of what culture means to people and how we experience it. That said, of course, cultural organizations want to explore digital solutions and how we can deliver culture in different ways. I mean, I'm incredibly pleased, for example, that the Arts and Humanity Research Council, the AHRC, are launching a big new boundless creativity project, along with projects like Audiences of the Future, where they will be investing in research to attempt to find ways of being able to deliver culture digitally. But the key for the cultural sectors is how can you deliver this digital material and simultaneously monetize it like the gaming industry does? That's not so easy. We've seen fantastic initiatives like National Theatre at Home on the broadcasting and plays on YouTube. The British Museum and National Museums Liverpool are doing wonderful work on their websites of effectively broadcasting exhibitions. And we know that digital skills will be future and will be crucial, and cultural organizations are investing in them. But as I say, we've got to find new ways of monetizing it.
Well, that leads into education, I guess. And, creative expression is at the heart of all industry. And therefore, to my mind, schools should be a place where creativity flourishes. the arts promotes diverse thinking and self-expression. So for the workforce of the future, how do you see the place of culture and creativity? And I include digital creativity in the classroom. Is it essential discipline or simply nice to have?
No, I think it's completely essential. I don't know whether you saw the Durham Commission on Creativity, which was led by individuals like Nick Sirota, the chair of the Arts Council, and that's come up with a very definitive idea of how creativity should be taught in schools, and not just in as it were creative subjects, but the idea of creativity, teaching creativity across all subjects. And I know how important it is to get culture into school, and the government has announced a £90 million arts premium that was announced in the election manifesto. So there is an intention to do that. One of the charities that I used to be a trustee of is called the Shakespeare Schools Festival, and I've just seen firsthand what it means to people to be able to children to get creatively and culturally involved from an early age, to not only put on a play, to act in it, to design the sets, to do the music, to do the marketing, and to try and put together a whole performance. And they get Shakespeare into their heads from an early age, and it is actually, I think it is life-changing and incredibly important.
Okay, I think we've only got a couple of minutes left now, so let's finish off on the future. I mean, the creative industries, if the one thing they always, or two things they always ask for, it's a constant ask, is around a skilled workforce and access to funding, especially in the video games industry in my sector. So how do you see your role regarding skills and funding challenges of the future?
I was going to say, I'm not getting onto that. My role at the moment is, because we are in such a serious situation, my role is making sure that the cultural sector gets through this and comes out the other side, and then make sure that we can then, renewal will come later, and thinking about individuals and people and how we encourage that will come much later. We are really in a very difficult situation now. And I know that the Secretary of State and ministers are working really hard and listening really hard and acting to make sure that we can get our cultural organizations through this, so that we can get to the skills side of things.
So what's your number one priority then going forward?
Right now, we've got I feel that right now, the next 2 or 3 months is, as I say, to make sure that we can find a mechanism to help cultural organizations get to the point where they can open. I mean, after all, our cultural organizations are a beacon to the world. They are one of the main drivers of our soft power. They are the main drivers of inbound tourism when that happens again. And we've got to invest in them to make sure that we can get them through to the next stage.
So finally then, in terms of quality of your life and economic contribution, what would you say to the world regarding UK creativity?
I would say, as you would probably say, and as the minister said earlier, it is one of, in my view, if not the element of our country that brings confidence to us as a nation and as a people. And it also brings an enormous amount of confidence in us from the way that people see us in the outside world. I think our creativity and our cultural sectors are incredibly successful, and are only unsuccessful at the moment because they're hampered by the pandemic. And so we must invest in them and give them the confidence that they will be able to get back to where they were before, so they can help the country navigate the very difficult economic situation that we're going to be facing over the next few years.
Thank you, Neil. And on that very positive point, I'd like to say thank you, everybody, and thank you for joining us, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at CogX.co.